Dear student, welcome to ePathshala. I am Dr. Rakesh Thakur, Associate Professor, Teaching Sociology in Postgraduate Government College of Chandigarh, Sector 11. Today's module is about globalization and its impact, migration and its discontent. We'll begin the module by explaining you the different meaning of globalization. We'll place it historically and would try to see that the interconnectedness between migration and globalization is not new. It is old. And migration is not of a singular nature. There are forced migrations. There are migrations which are taken for greener pastures. When you migrate, the way the host country receives you also has got varied response. So migration and globalization are two concepts which cannot operate in vacuum or a void. They need to operate in the socio-political, geographical and international politics that is happening around us. So let's understand globalization and its impact and the following: migration and its discontent. Critics of globalization contend that even if trade promotes material prosperity, it comes with high socio-cultural costs, running roughshod over the world's distinctive cultures. Globalization has increased the linkages between nation states, speeding up the exchange of goods, services, ideas, and people across the national boundaries. Definitely, no one is going to contest the nature of globalization. To explain, let me give you a very general definition of globalization, and that is, globalization refers to integration of different national economies at global level. It is a multidimensional process that amalgamates economic, cultural, and social change. One thing that catalyzes these changes and help globalization widen its reach in a faster way is network. It is this network which includes free flow of information, improved global communication with quick and cheap transportation costs. Let's now understand migration. Why we should understand migration? Because this module is about globalization and migration. Before I start telling you about the interrelationship, it is important for us to understand what do we mean when we use the word migration. Actually, the word migration is an umbrella term that not only includes those who migrate in search of greener pastures, but also comprise of refugees, displaced people, and others. The characteristics of these people is that they move across national or international borders, either permanently or temporarily. If all migrants were to be put into a single nation, it would be the world's fifth most populous country. By citing this example, what I simply want to argue is that understand why migration as a process is very important for a social scientist. It is important for various reasons. It is not merely numbers which are moving across, but these numbers have a distinctive human characteristic. They are reasons behind for the places which they are leaving, and there are reasons which makes them go towards places where they want to settle. To dwell further on this, let's understand the types of migration. Firstly, I'm going to talk about voluntary and forced migration. Let's see what does voluntary migration means. To put it simply, voluntary migration means willfully leaving behind their native places to pursue economic opportunities for personal gains, whereas forced migration means when the migrant is not ready to migrate, he wants to stay back at his native place, but he is forced to move out. Thus, these kind of migration is meant as forced migration. After discussing voluntary and forced migration, let's understand economic versus political migration. In case of economic migration, this is done to seek monetary benefits where the person who is migrating can locate for himself or herself greener pastures in economic terms. On the other hand, political migration is not something which one would welcome in one's life. It's like forced migration. In political migration, migration takes place to avoid the trauma of war in the native's place or the political turmoil where the individual has been on the receiving end. He or she or their family has been brutalized, or there is a threat to their life, there is a threat to their very existence. This all leads to political migration. So let me now again make a distinction. Economic migration was for greener pastures. Political migration is more for individual survival. Survival in terms of better condition of living, not in terms of economics, but purely in terms of existing as a human, politically, socially, culturally, free of any kind of brutality or oppression and suppression by the state or some other community or group. Now, many a times migration is welcomed where there are certain categories of people who are well qualified. They are invited to migrate to a country, whereas some are not. So, in the case of the former, we are going to term it as legal migration. The papers are in order, the person migrates, the person gets a permanent residency, then that translates into, the country of origin allows them to leave and they can go and settle into the new place. With some time, they can take the citizenship of the country. This is legal migration. But you must have heard of people who traffic human beings across the border. This is illegal migration. This is done through forged papers and other dubious means. So remember, migration is not a homogeneous category. There are different kind of migrants, and also there are different processes of migration, legal and illegal. Now let's understand permanent and temporary migration. In permanent migration, the people who are migrating, they look forward to settling down for life. Traditionally, these people are called as immigrant, and the phenomena is known as immigration. But there is also temporary migration, which many students undertake, many business people undertake, when people migrate to fulfill certain needs like completing education, employment, etc. But once their aim is achieved, they would like to come back to their country of origin. So there are two things which we talked about: legal and illegal migration. These are the ways in which you can migrate and the nature of migration, permanent and temporary. So it's important to understand that when we are talking about migration and globalization, we should keep these categories in our mind. Let me now discuss some examples of migration. The best example of migration is the Jewish diaspora. In 586 BC, after the destruction of Temple in Jerusalem, and secondly, when the Russian forced Jews to leave their soil, and later during the Holocaust in the Nazi Germany, the Jews migrated. It is often said that population flow of refugees and exiles are outcomes of forced migration only and not a byproduct of state action, but they also occur due to non-state or market forces also. If you would look at the Jewish example in the history, every time that they had to migrate because they were severely persecuted by the state, whether in the first case it was the destruction of temple, in the second it was a Russian who forced the Jews to leave their soil, or during Nazi Germany, the infamous Holocaust, which is the blot on humanity, the Jews undertook migration. It was a forced migration. Now let's look at another example within our own country. Punjabi migrants in Vancouver, Canada, and other advanced countries have developed several hubs of Punjabi culture in their vicinity and are fondly called as mini Punjabs. So, through the Punjabi and the Jewish example, we understood that how migration is a continuing phenomena. People, whether they are persecuted, like in the case of the Jews, or they are looking for greener pastures, like the Punjabis, the net result is migration. Let's try and understand the major negative repercussion of migration and their impact. There's a singular term which is going to encompass all the negative repercussion of migration, and that is discontent. Migration leads to discontent. Let's understand what kind of discontent we are talking about. Brain drain. In modern terms, this involves one-way migration of highly intellectual manpower from less developed countries to developed countries, and that too on a massive scale. Skills-based migration from less developed countries to developed countries is quite prominent in the present world scenario. For the receiving countries where these migrants go, migration of intellect brings along welfare, income, maximizing natural growth perspective. But for the sending nations, that is, from where these migrants originated but have left their motherland, the country where they were born, for them, that particular state, it is a process that leads to loss of income, welfare, and development, thus widening disparities at international level. For individual benefit, they do not stay back in their own country but move on to greener pastures. While they move up, the country suffers a loss of qualified people, which we term as brain drain. The migration of skilled people is harmful as the country loses the stock of high quality manpower that is essential for economic development. Imagine in our own country, if all the IT sector people from Bangalore, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, they plan to migrate abroad, what would happen to India? Imagine all the skilled people working in the health sector, all the good doctors, surgeons, whether they have neurosurgery, cardiac specialists, if all of them move away from the country, imagine the plight of our country. So truly, brain drain is something which is a very, very worrying factor for the country from where people go to seek individual greener pastures. The migration of skilled people is harmful as the country loses the stock of high quality manpower that is essential for economic development. Chances that these migrants' intellectual minds would again come back to their roots are almost negligible. As we say, there is always a hope that the person would come, but remember, during the most productive years of its life, the person is not contributing to his or her land of birth, but is contributing to another country. So while one country gains, another one loses. thus increasing disparity at the international level. Continuing further, let's understand what other discontent can come out of migration. Economic is one, brain drain is another. Amalgamation of culture is something which too carries a lot of meaning in times to come. On an emotional front, these migrants face difficulty in embracing culture of destination country, which results into cultural shock, and feeling of solitude disseminates. Moreover, natives of destination country lack cultural acceptability as well. Thus, adjustment of migrant becomes a tedious task. The fusion of cultures and their adaptation has given rise to fears about the dilution or disappearance of local or traditional culture. Global culture presents a picture of conjugated culture, which are a melange of diverse elements. The coexistence of multiple culture doesn't mean that these cultures are free from tensions and conflict. The spread of culture arouses the feeling of superiority among one section and inferiority amongst the other, serving as germinating ground for attacks, culminating hatred in mind and hearts of people of other culture. There's a strong chance of a development of a strong in-group feeling, thus resulting into the phenomenon of ethnocentrism, which can be very, very dangerous for the local population. It can lead to strife, enormous animosity at an individual level, or also group clash. Now, this loss of culture and this homogenization of culture both is something which is not a happy state for many cultural traits, and with time they would have disappeared. So let's understand, after the cultural dangers, how the loss of culture results into a sense of discontent, which can result into violence, large-scale rejection of the migrants, ghettoization of the people who are there within the country, taking these outsiders as being non-welcome. Yes, I am talking about racial discrimination or xenophobia. Racial discrimination is a direct manifestation of fear that germinates from migration. In this, basic standards of living provided to migrants suffer because natives treat them as aliens, and this creates an environment of feeling of hatred, biasness, and imbalance. Migration fiddles with psychological state of local people, and they think that migrants may take over their jobs, kill their share of seats in educational institutions, and they become ethnocentric. This is what is happening in parts of United States of America, Australia, or other part of the world which are considered by migrants to be the green pasture. Increase in multi-ethnic society has marked an onset of discrimination and violence directed against migrants, refugees, and other non-national by extremist groups in many parts of the world. After doing this, let's understand two more aspects, which is trafficking and smuggling. According to Article 3 of the Trafficking Protocol, trafficking of persons in the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring or receipt of person by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power or of a position of vulnerability, or of giving or receiving of payments or benefit to achieve the consent of a person having control over other person for the purpose of exploitation. This is what we mean by the term trafficking and smuggling. The term migrant smuggling refers to the facilitated illegal movement of persons across borders for profit. In one estimate, 2.5 million people are engaged in one or more forms of forced labor, including sexual harassment. According to the first Global Slavery Index, approximately 30 million slaves in the world and victims are trafficked from 127 countries to be exploited in 137 countries. An estimated 1.2 million children, which is under the age of 18 years, are trafficked every year. To conclude, I would like to summarize and say it would be correct to say that the flow of the people across the border, increase in the multicultural population, and the emergence of informal migration-based transnational network that helps in circulation of capital, goods and ideas also pose a challenge to nation states to control their sovereignty. Migration always influences states' capacity and autonomy, effect on state security and national identity. Such things leads to dissatisfaction, displeasure and resentment among both native and migrants. To conclude this lesson, I would say we all saw that globalization is a phenomena that is spreading far and across. Globalization has resulted into new windows of opportunities, especially for people with good education, the technocrats. They are looking for greener pastures and thus they are migrating to countries which would value their skill and would also reward them suitably. This was the one aspect. Another aspect which we saw was forced, coerced migration, where the state, based on a native's ethnic background, religion, language, or natural calamities, the native has to move to another place despite it not being wanting to do so. These are two contrasting scenarios. So whenever we look at migration and globalization, we must understand that there is not one single understanding. The conditions, the place which they go to, and the factors which leads to migration are varied. Thank you.